Have you ever noticed how almost every render has a building as the main subject and landscape is that nice garnish around it? Even most landscape rendering tutorials is about how the landscape can enhance the architecture and not so much about landscape design itself. I have been rendering landscapes on and off for a little over 9 years. And I have worked on projects in Denmark. I've worked on some international projects as well. When I started out, I used to create these Photoshop collages. If you have been doing this for as long as me, you probably know what I'm talking about. Later on, in the past couple of years, I have moved on to creating these more photorealistic renders, and my software of choice is D5. I think it has a really great asset library, specifically when it comes to landscape. A few months ago, I decided to pivot from designing landscapes to solely focusing on rendering them. When I decided to pivot, I of course got really curious about what is already out there, and it quickly became apparent to me that I have my work cut out for me. There are so many talented archivist studios out there. I mean, like most people, I was completely awestruck by the extremely talented Norwegian studio Mir, or the playful studio Beauty and the Bit, and the production studio Brick Visuals, just to name a few, of course. And while it's hard not to notice stunning landscapes in their work, the landscape is rarely the main character. It's often that supportive sidekick. It's there to enhance the architecture, and it's there to root the render in a specific place. Like, take the tall coconut trees as a backdrop for the tropical villa, or the cacti around the house in the California desert, or the pine trees in the cold, gloomy Scandinavian forests. Landscape is there to set the scene, but it is rarely the scene itself. What really struck me when I was looking at all of these talented studios is how they treat renders. To them, it's an art form. When you land on their websites, it's almost like you're looking at photographs that were shot for, I don't know, Architectural Digest or something. I was not looking for this. I was just doing some market research when I decided to pivot to see what the rendering scene looked like in 2026. But once you start seeing where the landscape sits in it all, you can't really unsee it. You know, it's kind of like buying a blue car, and then all of a sudden it seems like every other person owns a blue car, because that is what you see. Even the tutorials, I found tutorials that were done by landscape architects also. There's almost always a house at the center. I have yet to come across a landscape rendering tutorial that is showing how to create a render of a park or a detention basin. And don't get me wrong, I know that these renders are out there, because if you go to most landscape architecture practices websites, you will see those renders, of course. But it's just really hard not to notice when you watch these landscape rendering tutorials, not to see how it's mostly about just scrolling through the assets, adding whatever looks good, rather than following an actual landscape design. The design that we as landscape architects spent months, sometimes years developing, right? And that includes every single detail, even down to the placement of each individual species. Landscape deserves its own space in the rendering industry, not just to be the supportive sidekick. Now, this is not to say that there aren't a lot of great renders of landscapes out there created by internal teams at landscape architecture practices around the world. Of course there is. I've also seen them. But a rendering studio that is dedicated to landscape as the subject, I have not come across one yet. If you have, I am genuinely curious and I would love to see it. But regardless, there's a gap that we need to close.